Donald Trump's pick for US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has vowed to remove fluoride from America's drinking water. Dentists say it's safe to use and helps prevent cavities. So why is it coming under scrutiny? Trump's controversial new health secretary, RFK Jr., has declared fluoride will be removed from public water when the new administration takes over later this month. He claims the cavity-fighting mineral is linked to arthritis, thyroid disease, and impacts IQ. But will he act on his promise? And why has fluoride become such a hot topic?
It's been added to parts of the US water supply for over 80 years. But now, Donald Trump's new health secretary wants to stop the artificial use of fluoride in drinking water.
I think fluoride is a poison. It causes cancers. Of course, it causes your bones to deteriorate, and it causes severe IQ loss.
Around 3/4 of Americans have fluoride in their water supply. RFK Jr.'s comments have revived the debate over the benefits of fluoride and whether the practice is outdated given its widespread use in toothpaste. The mineral has been proven to prevent tooth decay and strengthen enamel.
Fluoride remains so important for oral health. We need to be continuing our work on persuading people not to eat so much sugar. We need to be doing things on food policy. But fluoride is an essential part of our armament, both from a public health perspective and from a professional perspective, because it recognises that while we've still got people at risk of this disease, we need to be doing what we can to prevent it occurring.
People in over 20 countries, including Australia, Canada and Ireland, drink artificially fluorinated water. 60 million people receive naturally fluorinated water in countries such as Sweden, Finland and China. Fluorinated salt and milk are also common in parts of Europe. New research from the US has linked higher fluoride exposure to lower IQ scores for children. So what next for fluoride in our water as its use comes under the microscope?
Well, let's meet our guests. In Guelph, in Ontario, Canada, we have Catherine Carstairs. She is health historian at the University of Guelph. In Washington, D.C., Matt Dallek. He is a political historian at George Washington University. And in London, we have Paul Anderson. He's a professor of oral biology. That's at Queen Mary University. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Catherine, I'll come to you first. We were always told that one of the great health breakthroughs and achievements of the 20th century was fluoridation of our water. And now suddenly we're revisiting it and wondering if it was that good after all. Talk me through what's going on here.
I think that actually water fluoridation has always been controversial and there have always been debates about it. So when it was first introduced in 1945 with a number of controlled studies, there was controversy then. There was a lot of controversy in the 50s and 60s when a lot of communities were making the decision in North America to add fluoride to their water supplies. So in Canada, which is the area that I've most extensively studied, in the 1950s and 60s, there were hundreds of referendums on water fluoridation, and actually 60% of the time they failed. So the controversy over water fluoridation is nothing new.
So, Matt, come in on this. This is getting a lot of media pickup because Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., Trump's pick to be in charge of healthcare in the United States, he's made it clear that he does not want this. He's not in favour of it. And he has lots of opinions on it. Give me your take on where this conversation will go in the new Trump administration.
Well, it's still a little bit head-spinning, to be honest, because for decades, there was a pretty, I think, rough consensus that fluoride was, in fact, one of the great public health interventions of the 20th century, that it had prevented dental cavities, tooth decay, especially among those who did not have access to fluoride toothpaste. And in the United States, at least, in the 1950s and 60s and beyond, the anti-fluoride movement embodied by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was really relegated to the fringe, to the political fringe. I mean, if anyone remembers the movie Dr. Strangelove, there's an amazing scene where the general spouts conspiracy theories about communists poisoning the water. And that was related to this idea that these wild conspiracy theories that the communists, that was government control, they were putting this poison in the drinking water. And roughly 70+% of the United States has access to fluoridated drinking water. So it's really only with the rise of RFK Jr. that this has become more of a mainstream conversation. The fact that we're having this conversation is kind of unreal. We wouldn't have had it probably 10 years ago. So it's hard to know where it's going to go. My guess is that RFK Jr. will have a significant impact on the debate, and we're probably likely to see less fluoridation across at least the United States is one possibility.
Paul, as someone who's worked their entire life and studied dentistry and got to where you are in the world of oral hygiene, give me your take on fluoride.
Well, there is no doubt that the addition of fluoride topically applied to enamel reduces the possibility of it reacting with acids. It significantly reduces that, and that has been shown worldwide, and that is indeed the case. So as a topical application, either through water supplies or through dental treatment, there is no doubt that fluoridated hydroxyapatite, which is what tooth mineral, enamel mineral is reacts far less with acids. So that is bound to be the case.
Paul, I want to read to you a quote from Eddie Crouch. He is the chairman of the British Dental Association, the BDA. So this guy knows what he's talking about. Eddie Crouch is on record recently as saying, "We believe public health policy should be led by the evidence, not the tinfoil hat brigade." He's obviously referring to RFK Jr. and others. What do you make of that quote?
I'm not quite sure when he made that quote. So, however, I think that's true of any science.
Good
Science
point.
is based on evidence, and that's the bottom line. And the evidence is, over many, many years, that there is a very good correlation between decreases in particularly caries, but and in enamel particularly, and water fluoridation.
Catherine, talk to me about Canada. I'm curious about the city of Calgary. So 2011, they decided to take fluoride out of the water. And then a decade later, there's a referendum to put it back in. Tell me what's happened in the intervening years, the health outcomes that Calgary in particular has seen, and just where the discussion is at now in Canada.
Well, Calgary is a very interesting case study because they've had more referendums on fluoride than any other city in Canada. It's been very controversial there. So as you pointed out, they did remove fluoride from their water, and then they decided to add it back in. And that's because studies showed that, in fact, there was a significant increase in children's caries rates when they took the fluoride out of the water. And as I think as some of the other people have already alluded to, this is especially important for children who are living in poverty, who tend to have much higher caries rates, who are more at risk of, attending hospital for early, for removal of caried teeth. One of the leading causes of surgery in the Canadian context is early childhood caries. So this still really can have a big impact on improving oral health, especially for children living in poverty.
And
so that's why Calgary decided to add it back in.
Catherine, is it widely accepted then in Canada that fluoride in your water is a positive?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'd say that we in Canada we're at little under 40% of the water is fluoridated, and that's because some of the largest cities in Canada, Montreal and Vancouver, have never fluoridated their water supply. And as I mentioned before, there have been long-standing concerns about water fluoridation, not based in good scientific evidence, but there have always been people who were worried about possible health effects of water fluoridation. There were people, as Mark mentioned, who were worried that it could, weaken people's will and make people, rife for communist takeover. But there were also people like RFK who argued that this was a conspiracy of big business. In his recent comments, RFK referred to this as an industrial waste product. And that was something that I came across time and time again in studying fluoride debates in Canada and the United States in the 1960s. The idea that the Aluminum Company of America was behind water fluoridation as a way of getting rid of their industrial waste.
Matt, I want to talk about the money side of things here. So it is widely reported that for every dollar spent on fluoride, the savings are $38 in terms of cavities that don't appear, treatment that is not needed. I mean, on the economic side of things, fluoride is a massive investment in public health.
Yeah. Well, that sounds right to me. I'm a historian, not a public health expert, but from everything I read, that's spot on. What I think is important, as the last speaker just said, is that the conspiracy theories, the anti-fluoride movement, has not just been confined to the far right. It's also on the left. And the conspiracy theories shift. So the far right in the 1960s, the John Birch Society argued that maybe this was a communist plot, right? That it was also a government intrusion on government was trampling on people's individual liberties because they were telling people, ordering them what they had to put in their body. And fluoride was unseen, right? You couldn't taste it. Very frightening. But on the left, of course, these notions that big business is somehow controlling it's this industrial waste product, right? And a city like Portland, Oregon, which is very progressive, has rejected fluoridation of the water. So the problem, though, if we just step back, is I think a larger assault on, frankly, the other two guests and the rest of the scientific public health community. Think about COVID. Think about Anthony Fauci in the United States, the attack on these so-called experts. And there is this, I think, global, actually, anti-elite, anti-science movement coming from different strains. And it's really, in a sense, reaching a peak that it has not had, especially in the post-COVID world. It is reaching a kind of culmination that I think has major ramifications and in many ways deleterious ramifications for public health, especially the poorest people who public health interventions tend to help the most.
Paul, how do you feel then as a professional? You've studied the science, you know what you're talking about. How do you feel when you hear RFK Jr. with no medical qualifications whatsoever chipping in and getting such global publicity on this?
Well, I think in the cases, and I think the previous speaker has just said, is that there is a degree of ignorance about the science, and that includes the clinical evidence about the impact that water fluoridation has had. So one has got to study all these things to get, I suppose, fact-checking, to use a jargon word, correct, so that one doesn't jump to fast conclusions, but listens to those who have studied any field, but in this case, extensively over many, many years. As one of the previous speakers said, I mean, there's been water fluoridation certainly in the US since the 1940s, and the evidence is exceedingly clear. But also the underlying science, i.e. that a fluoridated mineral of hydroxyapatite, which is what enamel is far more resistant to acid attack than unfluoridated. I mean, that's undebatable science. You can simply look at the solubility product of fluorapatite as opposed to hydroxyapatite, and that is universal fact. It happens would happen across the universe. Any planet, star in the universe, that fact will be true.
And Paul, tell me, in the United Kingdom, the percentage of the population is 10% get water with fluoride in it. Do you think that should be higher? Would you like to see an expansion of the delivery?
I think that, yeah, I think it is actually increasing, and that there is currently underway. I mean, the previous government was putting through a program to increase that, because again, there is no doubt about the clinical evidence that, as someone has just pointed out, I mean, likewise in the UK, the economic savings are of a comparable, I mean, in a sense, are going to be pretty similar to what has just been reported in the US. So I suppose, asking my personal opinion, but that's based on my professional knowledge, would be yes, but there are plenty of groups actually pushing for that, particularly there's a fluoridation society and oral health foundation that are pushing for this increase in the extent of water fluoridation in the UK. I think anyone who's in the field, certainly within the UK, would support that.
Catherine, to you, I've seen headlines that suggest there is a link between fluoride in water and low levels of IQ or stunted development of IQ in young children. So what's behind all of that? This seems to be something that, again, RFK Jr. and others are pumping out into the mainstream.
I mean, one of the things I've found in my historical analysis of the fluoride debates is whatever sort of health concern is coming to the fore at the moment tends to get affiliated with anti-fluoridation movements. So in the 50s and 60s, the main concern was around bone health. By the 1970s, a lot of the anti-fluoridationists are arguing that fluoridation would lead to increased rates of cancer. And there was all these studies that purported to show a link between fluoridated communities and higher rates of cancer. That all turned out not to be, in fact, the case. But, in the 1970s, there was a lot of concern about cancer. And so it is not surprising that fluoride got sort of connected to cancer in that time period. I think right now we're seeing a generation of parents who are enormously concerned about brain health because of the rise in autism, because of increased attention to issues of neurodiversity, the issue that so many parents feel like their children are coming of age in an incredibly competitive world, and they need to be giving them everything they can, sort of brain-wise, in order to be successful. And so I think the idea that fluoride could reduce IQ is, very scary for a lot of people. And so, I think just given where sort of our focus of medical fears is right now, it's not surprising that fluoride is being linked to lower IQs. There are a number of studies that have suggested an association. There's lots of, Paul can talk about this much more effectively than me, but as I understand it, there's a lot of methodological concerns with those studies.
And Matt, to you, in the United States, how much pickup does the whole low IQ fear or risk debate get?
Well, it's gotten some real traction. And again, my understanding is that there have been some studies that associate heavy quantities, large quantities of fluoride intake, much greater than what's in the water supply. But from everything I've read, those fears are not grounded in sort of the scientific reality of fluoridation of the water. But look, I mean, RFK Jr. is sort of the tip of the spear in the United States and maybe around the world of a conspiratorial, but also anti-public health, anti-vaccine, right? I mean, this comes in the context of this anti-vaccine movement, where RFK Jr. for many years has been positing that vaccines cause autism, or vaccines are the cause of, say, the measles outbreak in America and Samoa. Not the lack of vaccine uptake, it's the vaccines itself. And so he's attributed all kinds of ills to these public health interventions. He has this view that these sinister corporations are, manipulating society, right, to make them sicker, basically, so that they can then profit. And of course, there's a grain of truth to some of this, as there is with most conspiracy theories. But as with most conspiracy theories, they're bogus, right? They're not based on scientific reality, because the overwhelming evidence is that fluoride in the drinking water at safe levels is a great public health intervention. And even more so, that vaccines are maybe the single greatest public health invention of the past 100 years. And vaccine skepticism, denialism, is a major threat to, I think, the health of many Americans and also to many children. And we've seen that too with the resistance to COVID vaccines. So it comes in this broader context, but I don't think we should underestimate just how much power and kind of bully pulpit authority that someone like RFK Jr. Has assumed.
And Paul, as a man of science, as someone who has spent decades studying and researching dentistry and oral hygiene and health, you are 100% in favour of fluoride in water.
My personal position is yes. Whether that's a position, I'd be careful about what my employers might say, but that's my personal opinion, so I will litigate and protect myself. But yes.
Yes, and Paul, just on the issue of low IQ levels, what do you make of that conversation?
Well, it's fairly new, and I mean the UK government's position in their 2022 paper, the evidence does not support this, and various authoritative expert evaluations from different international organisations all agree that there is no convincing evidence that fluoride in drinking water at levels used in fluoridation schemes are harmful to general health. I mean that's the government position, and yes, as I say, you have to look for the evidence.
Thank you, Paul. Catherine, final point to you. A lot of people say we don't need fluoride in the water because it's in our toothpaste and they're adding it into milk in some countries. I mean, it's not going away, is it? I mean, fluoride is going to stay in water in many countries around the world, regardless of what RFK Jr. does in the United States.
I mean, outside of North America and Ireland, Australia, water fluoridation has not been hugely popular internationally. It definitely holds out the promise of reducing tooth decay, and especially in the era in which it was introduced, it dramatically reduced tooth decay in the 50s and 60s. But today, now that we have access to fluoridated toothpaste, which are very widespread around the world, the benefits are somewhat less than they used to be, which isn't to say that they don't exist. There are definitely benefits to water fluoridation. But there are other mechanisms that we can use as well to use fluorides to prevent tooth decay. So I'm not sure water fluoridation is going to disappear, but I'm not sure that it's going to expand either. One of the things that we're seeing in Canada is that when communities have aging fluoride equipment and they need to replace it, they're making the decision not to replace it, partly because it just doesn't seem as crucial a public health intervention today as it did when it was initially implemented. So, I think, these conspiracy theories aside, there are other reasons why water fluoridation may be on the decline.
Just one quick question to Matt. Matt, just briefly tell me, how does the average American see RFK Jr. then?
Well, much to my surprise, I think there's a fair amount of support for him. I think that views are still being formed, but they like some of what he's saying. They like some of his anti-corporate, anti-establishment rhetoric. They're suspicious of public health interventions. He sort of ideologically crosses boundaries between kind of right and left, and that and then he's got this environmentalist background. So even though I think most of what he is saying about public health is quite dangerous for people's health and kids' lives, there's a surprising amount of not maybe majority support, but maybe a plurality.
Matt, Paul, and Catherine, thank you all so much for your insight on this one. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.